there's this idea that I have to build out this kind of segue through every song, and there's a purpose, because if we don't do this, it's just going to be a sequence of songs, and it's not going to be presented the way that I want to, the way that I want the listener to hear it. And I said, well, you have 72 hours, so get to it.
Hey guys, James Wilson Taylor here for Rock Sound. Now the new album from Shinedown is right around the corner. I am delighted to say that on the line right now we have Brent. How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm in London at the moment, hanging out at Warner Music, which is nice to see everybody buzzing about in the building. It's stacked full of people, and it's actually, when I walked in the other day, I've been in London for like the last 5 days. It's good to see everybody back.
Yeah, life's coming back a little bit. It's a nice feeling, man. Nice feeling, particularly in this industry, man. You know, you must be absolutely delighted after a strange couple of years for everybody in terms of live shows and in terms of putting new music out and everything. You're hitting the ground running. You know, this is a new era for you guys. You must be extra excited, I'd imagine, after a little bit of quiet time to be able to come back all guns blazing like this.
Being honest, there was never really any quiet time.
Okay.
Um, and in retrospect, Planet Zero coming out this year, it was quite a journey to get to this point. Obviously, the record's coming out April 22nd of this year, but I go back to the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. Ultimately with that, when it occurred and everybody was put inside, my thought process was, okay, what's actually going on right now, and how do we maneuver this? And the biggest thing that I needed to do was to educate myself. So in the beginning of everything, we connected with an incredible organization called Direct Relief. We raised $500,000 with them for COVID-19 response at the height of the pandemic. And then myself and Zach were in the middle of finishing up a double album with a side project, Smith and Myers, at that time. So we actually did 22 drive-in shows in the U.S. during 2020. That rolled over into 2021. Obviously, we had begun the writing process for what is now Planet Zero, but we continued to do shows at the beginning of 2021, and then Shinedown in the summer of last year. We did 8 shows, 2-week break, 5 weeks on, and then the back half of last year finished up the Smith and Myers album cycle. And then as we rolled into 2022, we just did the West Coast. That had been postponed for the last 2 or 3 years. So we just did that, and we're getting ready to go back out on the road April 1st, first arena tour with a brand new show that we just built from the ground up with Pretty Reckless and Diamante. And looking forward to getting back to Europe and the UK in June, and then headlining in the UK in June, in November and December. A lot of touring this year, obviously, but never really had any downtime.
That's a good way to be, man. No, I respect you for that. Finding ways to make it work in trying times. That's always the best way to be in these situations, man. That's great to hear. And of course, let's talk new music, because that's been the priority, I suppose, is working up this new record that's about to come. Let's start with what people have heard. First of all, congrats on the title track and all that kind of huge success. I know it's been record breaking on certain charts out in the States now and at the minute. You guys have done phenomenally well over the years, but this has got to be a really, really nice way to come back. Just tell me a little bit about the writing process behind Planet Zero as a song, because like I say, seems to have really, really connected with a big audience.
Ultimately, it had a lot to do with listening to the fan base. We've often said in Shinedown that we have one boss. It just happens to be everybody in the audience. So we're very clear in regards to how much attention we are paying our audience. I think the biggest thing that they wanted was they wanted us to light them up. They wanted confidence. They wanted something that had an impact. But Planet Zero, I would say that riff was labored over quite intensely. Eric is the writer of the riff. And I mean, Eric is also the engineer, the mixer, and the producer of Planet Zero. The last album, Attention, Attention, he produced, engineered, and mixed that one as well. So we did another record in-house. But sonically also, the whole record did not really rely on a lot of layering this time around. Focused a lot more, specifically with Planet Zero, putting the vocals really right here and making sure that there wasn't a lot of effects, not like stacking too many elements of the instrumentation, bringing it back to drums, bass, guitar, the vocals, but what is the principal purpose of everything, and kind of having a very ferocious, reinvigorating sound of Shinedown. Some people have said that it harkens back to kind of the Sound of Madness era, just updated a little bit. We just had a different approach this time around. Eric really wanted the record to sound ferocious, and I think he achieved that.
Yeah, it definitely comes through, man. It's nice and hard hitting for sure, and it's it's a testament to kind of the record as a whole. Really, we'll get into it, but I really really like how it flows together. There's 20 tracks. I'm sure people have already seen in the pre-orders and stuff. A lot of little interludes in there which make it flow together really, really nicely. Little electronic tinges, but you're right. So many of those kind of hard hitting. I don't want to say back to basics because that sounds like I'm putting it down a bit, but yeah, I think you put it very well of like stripping back that instrumentation a little bit and like really just hitting it hard. Tell me, I guess, a little bit about that wider approach to the album, because I think everything you've just said about that single applies to a lot of the bigger rock tracks that are in this record as well.
I think that it was just really important to not be desensitized to the other albums and remembering the facet of that was a moment in time, that was an era. If you look at the trajectory of the band, the one thing that sets Planet Zero apart from some of the other records is that we wrote this record in real time, because everything that's on this album happened to all of us in the duration of the last 2.5 years. Everybody was put on the same platform. So it was important to have that intensity be on the record as well, because not only were we looking at what was going on in the world and what was happening around all of us, we also had to ask ourselves, this is going to be the first thing that people hear that's new since 2018 when the last album was put out. So it was really important. I don't think that that's the wrong way of approaching it either, when you say bring it back to basics, because the pendulum swings back and forth in regards to rock and roll. I always look at rock and roll as a lifestyle and a way of life for people, but you're never going to replace drums, bass, guitars, badass vocals, and a killer song. The message is very important as well, but there was no shortage of subject matter with this album either. There was so many things going on in the world that we were just pulling from that, but it was also to have an architecture of what's the message inside of this record. And really the message is, how do we educate ourselves? How do we allow each other to be human? It seemed like in the last couple of years, especially in the ideology of cancel culture, like you're not allowing anybody to have a human moment anymore. Somebody might have made a mistake 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and maybe they didn't do the right thing. And don't get me wrong, if it's a heinous crime that they committed, they should be reprimanded and they're probably in jail. But dynamically, we're all human. We all make mistakes. We all grow from that. And you have to allow people to have human moments.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing the themes running through the record, and that comes through musically as well. Obviously we've seen even in the music video for the single that's out there, this big kind of futuristic feel to it. I thought it was interesting the way, like I mentioned, there are several interludes on here that seem to tie into that kind of, I guess, futuristic sci-fi, however you want to word it, but that sort of theme. Tell me a little bit about the thinking behind that idea and how that applies, I guess, to the wider themes you're talking about.
Well, so the AI life force, which is called Siren, starts off very friendly in a way and slowly begins to deteriorate because the citizens or the individual that's actually alive starts figuring out what's going on. And it becomes an element of what's real, what's fantasy, what was planted, and what's actually happening in that person's subconscious. I think that the whole dynamic of Siren is remembering that people will talk about the internet being undefeated, and it's not the case. Mother Nature is undefeated. And I think she's proven that in the last couple of years. But, you have to also remember, too, that this planet has been in existence for quite some time. So it's an awareness of we're not the only ones here, okay? And we have to look at that and be objective about that, but also be honest with one another. But where Siren came from was out of necessity, to be honest with you, because I remember calling Ted Jensen, who mastered the album, who's mastered all of our records, except for the debut record. And it was a Thursday that I called him. Eric was deep into the mixing process, but he had been in the mixing process for about a year. And we were getting into that place where we've got to master because we had an outline of when we wanted the record to come out, how we were going to tour, what we're doing this year and beyond. I called Ted on a Thursday and said, "Hey, what does your Monday look like?" And he said, "What do you need it to look like?" And I said, "We'll be there on Monday." So I went back in the studio and I said, "Good news." And Eric said, "Awesome. What is that?" And I said, "We're going to master it on Monday." And he was like, "I'm not done. I'm still, there's things, and there's this idea that I have to build out this kind of segue through every song. And there's a purpose, because if we don't do this, it's just going to be a sequence of songs and it's not going to be presented the way that I want to, the way that I want the listener to hear it." And I said, "Well, you have 72 hours. So get to it." So he literally gave birth to Siren in about 3 days from the ground up. So it honestly came out of his mind, and to be bold, probably one of the most extraordinary things I witnessed of him creating that from scratch with literally 72 hours.
Man, pressure is a privilege. That's the way it works, man. That's incredible right there. Really, really amazing work to put that together in a short period of time. You mentioned before, obviously it's been a minute since the last full-length record from you guys, about 4 years now since Attention Attention. And I want to kind of ask you about what the aims were moving forward. Obviously you're going to learn something new every record you make. Is there anything from that previous one when you'd wrapped up that era where you thought, okay, this is what we want to try next time, this is how we want to react against it or take something from it and push into the new era? How did that work for you moving on from that previous record to this one?
I think a big part of it was Eric with the band in the studio. He really focused this time. Listen, with technology and computers, especially if you're talking about Logic and if you're talking about Pro Tools specifically, you can cut and paste. You can do these things where you're utilizing speed in regards to making a record. You get the song written, but then the traditional idea of like bringing in and doing it analog, where you have to bring the band in, you have to make sure you get the takes all the way. It takes a lot more time, and you need to be able to, how do I say this nicely? You need to be able to play your instrument. And for us, we've always been very specific about that element, but what made this different, I feel specifically, we also, because of when lockdown occurred, I was calling in June of 2020, trying to get an understanding of studios as we were writing, when we could actually go in and start to record the actual record. And none of those studios were saying, "Yeah, we have time here. We're going to let people come in here. Here's the protocol." There was like, we have no idea when we're going to be able to open these doors. So we built a studio on Eric's property from the ground up in 18 weeks. So we had to do that in order to have a place to actually record it. And then once the band all arrived in the same room, Eric was very focused on all of the songs have to be played through from the beginning to the end. And if you mess up in the middle, it's totally fine, but you got to start over because you have to play it all the way through. So that was a big thing. Like, the reason the record sounds very primal and the reason the record has a very ferociousness to it is because a lot of that was in a room together. A lot of the vocals, doing one pass or going back in, maybe touching some things here and there. You would cut and paste here and there, different parts or what have you, but the core of each song had to be played through. So you had more of a band feel. At least in my opinion, that's what made it a bit more raw.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach, man. It definitely paid off in the sound of it. Like I say, I think that really, really comes through. And a couple other things I wanted to ask you about before I let you go. I mean, I correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think next year when we're looking at 2023, we're going to be 20 years then since the debut album was released, right? It's going to be that kind of anniversary thing. And look, anniversaries are what they are. I don't know how much attention people pay to these things necessarily. It's always up to a different individual band. But 20 years since the debut is a big deal, right? Have you guys thought about whether you want to acknowledge that in some way or do something around that?
Oh, I think that we'll absolutely acknowledge it. What we decide to do with it will be interesting. But we're definitely going to put something together. I mean, we're just not the band that's very big into like quote unquote greatest hits, or we can totally look back and look back fondly of the beginning of the estate of the band and when the band began. Um, and obviously that first album, Leave a Whisper, there's been a lot of people that are asking, will you play it in its entirety? Because it is the 20 year where you do a run of shows where you'll play it all the way. And I would say that would possibly happen, but it just has to be special. It just has to be, and you can't pander to those types of moments either. You have to make it very specific and do something where you're acknowledging it. You do maybe a one night event where you do that, but then you move on because there's a lot to do with the new record, and the catalog holds itself where it is now. The goal is to be able to celebrate all of those anniversaries and those achievements, but definitely we'll acknowledge it.
Exciting, man. Yeah, and speaking of shows, of course, like we said at the top, you're going to be back in June time for Download Festival. Always such a massive, massive event in the rock calendar. I know you're well aware of this. Tell me a little bit about your memories of that, because, oftentimes I speak to bands who not only when they've played it or are going to play it, but also they have memories of a kid of just being aware of what Donington was, of what that means to rock music in general, right?
As a young man growing up in Knoxville, Tennessee, in America, it was all about like these kind of bootlegs that you would get VHS of Castle Donington, and when it was Monsters of Rock, and I think everybody looks at those shows. For me, as a kid in the southern area of the United States, I remember the very first time that I saw a Monsters of Rock filmed event where there was like what looked like an endless sea of people. Like I had never seen something where I'm like, that's in one place where there's all these people. And I think that was something that still to this day kind of holds its edge in my mind. And to fast forward in our career and the amount of times that we played Donington, starting at the very, very low end of the totem pole, if you will, to being able to notch up. You want those moments in time, you want to be able to do this. You don't want it to just go like this and that. You need to be kind of gradually progressing to be able to. Sometimes I look at, Download, and if you're not prepared for that size of an audience, it can be terrifying. But I still get really, really nervous before any show. I would be nervous if I didn't get nervous because it lets me know I'm alive. But obviously for me, growing up, Castle Donington, Download, all those areas, those shows, especially from the European side, I just remember seeing those VHS filmed moments in time going, if I could ever get just a moment in my life to be able to attend that kind of a show, let alone play it. We don't take it for granted, is what I'm saying. We're very honored to be able to be in the company of all those bands and all those people every year that we're allowed to play those events.
Yeah, always an exciting one, man. I'm sure it's going to go down an absolute storm once again. And I'll leave you with this, man. You kind of hinted at it earlier. I'm not sure how much you're allowed to tell me or want to tell me, but a return to the UK after that is very much on the cards, isn't it?
100%. November, December of this year, we'll be back as a headliner. Working out all the details now, but we'll be back.
Very excited to hear that, man. Well, it's really nice to talk to you, man. Congrats on this new record. Best of luck with everything. And yeah, like I say, look forward to seeing you later in the year over here.
Much respect. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to me. I very, very much appreciate it.
Always good to see you, man. All right, Brent, everybody.